You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tammy Urbanic.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. I'm Tammy Urbanic. Thank you so much for joining me. Journey for Truth Radio is always on demand and with many new episodes. On my website, empowermentthroughhealing.org, you can look up a Tai Yi treatment titled Beyond Love. This particular treatment is for people who truly have ADHD. This is not for people who have been misdiagnosed or simply told by others that they have ADHD. And this will really assist them in working with their brain, working with their mind, and working with some of those symptoms that they might have. Mm-hmm. Also on JonahLifeInstitute.com, you can sign up for their free newsletter. It's only sent out once a month, and it's full of information, articles, questions and answers about healing. Wonderful information in that newsletter, and again, it's free on JonahLifeInstitute.com. My guest this week is Melissa Hood. Melissa has struggled with ADHD, and over the course of her years, she has lost 40 jobs. She's going to talk with us about her experience and about her story in Memoirs of an ADHD Mind. Melissa, welcome.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Now, what led you to lose 40 jobs in 15 years?
Well, actually, it was because of the way that I learned, and because at the same time, the science world hadn't discovered the condition of ADHD. They discovered it, they just weren't too far into their research with it.
Okay.
And so a lot of society, as well as educators, employers, weren't familiar with the condition. And if they were familiar, it probably wasn't enough to, educate them as to how they could help me in my job search or in my job and career activities and things like that. And so it really did have a huge impact on my life.
Were there certain things that going on where you didn't get along with an employer? Was the difficulty in mastering a task or taking on a task?
It was more the mastery of task and the way that I learned, because within the education institutional aspect, when we go to school and we're sitting down and trying to learn a subject, the person that doesn't have ADD, ADHD learns with strictly audio learning. And that's the primary way of teaching right now. And so the same component can be applied to our jobs within the way we learn our jobs. And so for the ADD, ADHD person, we learn in all four learning styles at the same time, which are hands-on, visual, repetition, and audio learning. And we have to have all four in order to process the information as well as to move forward and grasp it. And so it's a big problem, and I think it's still a problem today within the job market, because a lot of employers, I think they're gravitating into it, but they're right at the starting line. So.
I used to be a school teacher, and I always thought that kids really needed multiple ways to learn. They needed multiple methods. And so as a language arts teacher, special education teacher, I would use audio, I would use video, I would use visual, like reading text, I would use kinesthetic, different activities. And I always felt that was just beneficial for all students to be able to learn differently and just have their different methods and their different sensories activated during the learning process. But I can imagine, that's school, that's middle school in my experience, but I can imagine in the work setting, they'd probably just kind of throw on you these expectations, do this, do this, do this, without perhaps effective training. Is that what you're also stating?
I believe that is part of it. And the other thing is, for ADD, ADHD students in the workforce right now is technology. And a lot of colleges are gearing their programs towards technology, as well as junior highs and high schools, with having students learn on laptops now, and they're doing a lot of work online because technology is more systematic. Well, we're systematic thinkers, and it's a line upon line, precept upon precept, and technology is geared like that. So we've got the hands-on, the repetition, the visual, and the audio all at the same time. So it works to our advantage. But almost, I don't want to say the problem's taking care of itself, because there are still other components that drive that. But it is a plus for us moving forward. And I would even venture to say, even in my last job, was probably one of the first jobs in my career where I had an employer who was understanding about ADD, ADHD, and even joked, I think everybody's a little ADD, ADHD, and I was like, okay, but long term, she had the patience to help me learn the job and maneuver into higher level success. And so I just think it really depends upon working with you and the level of patience and learn about the condition.
How did the losing of so many jobs, how did that impact your self-esteem?
Had a super high impact. I mean, it was really difficult for me for years. And because I hadn't been diagnosed until I was 28, it all happened, gosh, I got diagnosed, but it continued on even after into my 30s. And that was because I was still trying to master the condition. But the self-esteem issues, probably, I didn't get healing for those until I'd say in my 40s, where I started to come to terms with accepting myself and, okay, this is the way that I learn. This is me. So, I mean, but I think it all boils down to mastery of the condition. How well do you master it? I mean, because if you can catch it at an early age and you can help that child maneuver through cognitive development where the condition is triggered, and stress triggers the condition. That's the number one trigger of the condition. And it causes the brain to misfire, causing bunny trails and distractions and stuff. But if you can catch it early on, and I know a lot of parents probably don't like this, and I'm kind of halfway on this, but getting them on meds, which helps the brain to fire consistently, that can curtail that to where that child can continue advancing into, higher level learning. And so it's a parental choice, and I think the student's choice, but I was on them for 6 years, and that was probably the only way I was able to advance.
So if you were on it for 6 years, indicating or implying that you're not on it anymore, how did you make that transition? Because I know that there are a lot of kids on medications. In fact, we're a very over-medicated population, and our children are very over-medicated. And in some teenagers, they just stop taking their medications and they actually start selling it, making a few dollars here and there, probably more than a few dollars. So, and in some cases, kids will begin developing certain symptoms as a result of their medication. I'm not saying meds are right or wrong. It's not my place. But how did you make that transition from being on meds and off?
Well, when I was 10 years old, I think when the condition was at its height, I used to have this PE teacher who would tell me to go run laps during my PE time because I was so hyper. I mean, I had a really severe case of ADHD. So I was ultra hyper, ultra impulsive. And this particular teacher observed me, and I guess just being a mom, she was like, Missy, go run. You go do 5 laps around that track. And so she observed that after having me run, it would be a release for me, which was also a tool, a learning tool for myself, because after that I became an avid exerciser. And then I started noticing patterns after I would exercise or when I was eating certain foods, what would trigger and how my body would react to different things versus lack of good nutrition. And because I hated taking the meds, I don't like the way it made me feel like a drone. And although it helped me to focus, I felt like I was never present in the moment, like I was in this cloud, although I could sit and focus. And so I wanted to gravitate off the meds and tested it. I didn't ask my doctors. I just started weaning myself off through good exercise and good nutrition, and that's how I've maintained it, even to this day. And so now my cognitive development has obviously advanced, and I'm at a higher level learning and critical development and critical thinking. And so I don't need the meds anymore. My brain has matured to the point to where I can focus and I can stay on task.
I think that's great advice for anyone, regardless of their diagnosis, of really looking at diet and looking at certain dietary triggers. I know for a lot of kids it's sugar, processed sugar. For some kids, gluten has a major impact on the brain. Some people simply think that gluten just impacts, how food is digested, which is true. But there's also, the gut is a second brain to let's say, the brain in the head. And looking at those pieces, and then also looking at definitely the exercise. I think a lot of kids are denied the ability to go out and play because they're in the classroom, they're taking the test. They have to learn to mastery in order to take those tests effectively, which because the schools get graded on those tests and they get their money from those tests.
Yeah.
But it's difficult for a lot of kids to just be in that seat all the time and that learning. And there needs to be, I love that the exercise. I love what your PE teacher did, just have you run around the laps. That's perfect. And for a lot of adults who might be struggling with ADHD, just go out and run or skip or jump rope or do something that's going to increase physical activity.
But it's funny, I guess, the way it worked out, because when I was a young kid, it wasn't diagnosed yet. And so I didn't have any clue until I got diagnosed what was going on. And to me, I also had a weight problem back then. And so my mother and dad had placed me on fish and chicken and a lot of vegetables. And so I'm not a really big sweet eater anyway. And I never really have been. And so that's really kind of been to my advantage. And so I can tell immediately, even as an adult, if I eat sugars or breads, which I'm not a big bread eater. I love fish and I really eat clean. I try to eat really clean. I call it eating clean. And you can just tell the difference. You can really tell a difference. And I don't miss it. I feel good. And at least I don't have to take the medicine. So I'm happy about that.
I agree with you that catching it early so that parents can help guide their children through a cleaner diet and guide them away from the processed sugar. My grandson does not have ADHD, but it was very obvious he was having a reaction to sugar behaviorally. You could almost guarantee that there would be some sort of similar behavior going on if he had processed sugar. So she really guided him to tell him, you cannot have sugar. This is not okay within your diet. And, he was 3.5, 4 years old at the time. And he's really learned now, I can't have sugar. And so if someone offers him sugar, does that have sugar? I can't have that sugar. And he's 5. So it's, you start early and you teach your children what is appropriate for their body, their diet, and that can be very beneficial.
Well, I've also done a lot of studies as far as like blood type and things like that. For your blood type, have you heard of that book?
Yes.
I love that book too, because it really, I'm an O-type blood person, and I've always wondered why I craved like salmon, blueberries, and all these foods as a little kid, and it's I believe because of my blood type. So I believe my point is that I believe your body knows what it needs.
Right, exactly.
And so entering all other foreign things into it, I mean, you cause a lot more problems for yourself if you're not paying attention instead of really being guarded against it. And so, I live by that.
Now, you have made the statement that many with ADHD may have had a trauma in their life of some sort. Is that something that you experienced?
Was it caused by trauma? So it cut out.
Yes.
What you said?
Was ADHD, was there trauma involved in terms of leading up to having ADHD?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I had experienced sexual abuse outside of my family, and I had never correlated the two. But now that I'm getting into my dissertation, I'm starting to see a correlation between trauma and the fracturing of the mind with the fracturing of the heart. And so I actually coach women and men right now who have gone through traumas in their background, and as they receive inner healing and psychological healing, it starts bringing a single focus and a singleness of heart, and it helps them to maneuver forward.
Is that something that you receive counseling or have received counseling for?
I have, yes, ma'am. I have, and so it's an interesting topic as far as the research is concerned and what affects ADD or promotes it. What promotes it, and so I do believe that is a contributing factor in having it.
I agree with that. In the beginning of today's show, I mentioned a treatment beyond love. And it addresses ADHD because many times, in what we were taught in learning this treatment, many children who form ADHD symptoms and are diagnosed with ADHD have experienced some sort of trauma. And in many cases, the trauma was in utero. Sometimes the trauma was during birth. Sometimes the trauma happened after birth. But there's some sort of, for many, you can't say all for a blanket statement, but for many, something is going on that's creating, let's say, disharmony in the brain and a disconnect in the brain. And in some people state, the reason it's titled Beyond Love is because some people state, well, if we just love the child enough, this will go away. And many times there needs to be more. So it's beyond love. Love, of course, is very, very, very important. But this concept of there needs to be other measures taking place in order to assist a child in understanding how his or her brain is functioning and how to work with it, like what you were describing. Now, how were you diagnosed with ADHD? Did you just get fed up with the symptoms and you went to the doctor? How did that happen?
Oh, gosh. Well, I had friends. I believe, too, like draws like. So I drew a lot of other ADD people around me. And everybody kept telling me, I think you're ADHD. I think you're ADD. And I was like, I think you need to leave me alone and be quiet. That's not my problem. You probably have it, not me. But anyway, long story short, I did. I got tired of the job losses. And I'd gotten to a place, I think, where I was kind of peaking at the 40th job loss or something. And I thought, maybe it's time to go get diagnosed and see if somebody can give me some answers. And I sat on the planet, and he just, right from the minute I walked in the door, because he started watching my mannerisms and things like that, he's like, would you be interested in taking a test on attention deficit disorder? And I thought, oh. And I think I was really, really bummed out. It bothered me a lot to get diagnosed because I had so many people telling me, this is what's wrong with you all my life. You've got something wrong with you all the time. And I got tired of it. I just wanted somebody to tell me something that was right with me.
Exactly.
And he was really, really great about it because he said, okay, it's not a personal thing. A diagnosis is nothing personal, but it's a doorway for us to help you maneuver through into a better tomorrow. And I was like, that's kind of a neat way to say that. And I thought, okay, I can live with that. And so he started giving me different methods and different tools and ways to approach stress and things that I could approach, like stress in the workplace and at school, to where I could advance. And then I started combining those with my own coping skills that I had developed, and I thought everybody did them. And then I did my master's thesis on them, and it took me down a different avenue too. But I really, really have learned that not a lot of people know these things. There is a way to overcome this until you get into wholeness. Because the whole time you're doing this and the whole time you're trying to maneuver through the fractioning of the mind, you need to be getting some type of inner healing so that you can become into full circle and into wholeness. So
wonderful, wonderful. Now, how does ADHD impact children differently than adults?
I think adults, I would like to think adults, unless they're just survivors, have better coping skills. And I think my biggest concern is that because children have parents, hopefully they have parents that look out for them and that help take care of their needs, that they have more of a tool or a mechanism that can maneuver them into a place of progression, say, as opposed to an adult that's gotten stuck and doesn't have the right coping skills and is just fighting. And I've met people like that too. I mean, you've seen the child that acts out of anger and frustration because they don't know how to cope with what they're dealing with, and their parents are frustrated, the educator's frustrated. Well, adults that aren't diagnosed are like that as well because they're stuck. They can't advance. And so with the right coping skills, and I discussed this in my dissertation, or excuse me, my master's thesis as well, when you have a child that's in junior high, high school, elementary school even, you have people creating structure for that child, whether it's counselors setting their schedule, you have mandatory school times to be at school, you have homework times, dinner time, everything's done for you. So that's kind of their safety mechanism. But what type of structure have the parents taught that child when they leave home to go to college? Because some people develop structure better than others.
Right.
And so we're finding drop because a lot of these students don't know how to cope and create their own structure? Do they maintain those study times? Do they have study groups? Do they have set times that they go meet with professors to ask additional questions that they may have? Are they even enrolled in the Office of Disability Services and the different services that are provided for them there? I mean, so these are different tools that they need to be aware of.
So it sounds like to me that you have really understood exactly how your brain operates and how to work with that instead of seeing it as a deficit, instead of seeing as something's wrong with me. This is just how my brain operates. And so therefore, I'm going to work with it in that manner instead of going into judgment, instead of going into, I have to take all these different drugs for the rest of my life, but really seeking out ways to work with it in a natural sense so that your brain is working in its natural manner.
I actually did, and it's really weird how it came about. It actually came about in my BA program that I would even know to pay attention. Still baffles me today, but I would notice how I learned in one teacher's class, and say a substitute would come in and say I wasn't really grasping the material under the first teacher, but the substitute, I'd rock it and I'd ace the class. Or you know, does that make sense?
Right.
And so I recognized the patterns. And I guess, too, I've always been a real optimist in the idea that everything's overcomable in this life with the right attitude. And I'm not going to let anything dictate my future, or anyone for that matter. I believe in God, and I believe a strong spiritual foundation is a real strong determinant in how we maneuver through different obstacles in our life. But I believe everything's overcomable because of it.
And believing in your own personal power, personal power to read those patterns, recognize those patterns, make those different choices. That takes a lot of work, and that's very commendable. I mean, I really applaud the work that you put into it, because that takes courage, and that takes the willingness to put in really that blood, sweat, and tears.
It's been an interesting journey, actually, because I never really knew what I was. I mean, I knew I was paying attention to where it would take me. And had you asked me 20 years ago, or told me, hey, Melissa, in 20 years, you're going to be in your doctorate program. And I'm like, oh, right. I mean, really, that was really my response. I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. Because everybody around me told me I was stupid. And even in my approach to a BA, I had professors telling me, you're just not college material. You probably need to go get a job. In my head, I was thinking, you need to get a different job because I'm not quitting. That's terrible.
That is awesome. And I've heard some similar stories where someone's told you're stupid, you need to change your focus, you need to change your ideas of success because you can't do X, Y, and Z. And I think it's a Chinese proverb that is, do not stand in the way of the person that you said something was impossible. I completely just bashed that proverb, but simply stating that if you're going to tell someone something's impossible, at least don't stand in their way when they go upon it, achieving it. And that's wonderful. And a lot of people really need to hear that, especially people who have been bullied, who have been told they cannot achieve something that they have been wanting to achieve. Now, do you think kids are overdiagnosed?
I do. And it's because I think that society has gotten... It's funny we're having this conversation because I was just talking on another show yesterday, and we were having the same discussion about labeling. And we've become a society that if we don't understand somebody, then we have to label them. We have to label them something. And it may not even be the truth. And as opposed to, say, 20 or 40 years ago, where we had a more loving attitude and acceptance of one another. And so I know that ADD people, ADHD people can have tics and quirks, and we can be different. But I'm no different than the other average learner who just needs audio learning. I just learn differently. That's the only difference. And my first approach when I meet these kids that struggle with condition, the first thing I always tell them, I always start off with, do you realize you are the most brilliant, out-of-the-box thinker? That your IQ is probably off the charts, which is the truth. These kids, that's why they get bored so easily. And I always tell them, don't let anybody ever tell you any different. because you're brilliant. And it's to build their self-esteem and to let them know this is the new pathway you're on. Approach it like this, kind of a thing. Instead of saying, well, you know, you learn differently and you're not like other students, and the compare and contrast thing. And since I don't understand you, I got to label you something. And
exactly.
it's discouraging. It's very discouraging. So, yeah, encouragement's my preference. So.
Now, you were mentioning that you are now in your doctorate program, which I can imagine carries a lot of stress. And earlier we were talking about stress is a trigger. How are you working with that?
I am an avid exerciser. I actually exercise 4 times a week. I'm on a strict diet. Those are my first 2 rules. And then just really maintaining a real strict schedule. I mean, I know I have so many hours in a day to get things done. And so I really schedule my time and I stick to it, which is a lot of self-discipline. But the higher, you know, life takes you, I guess, you have to mandate your time. Mm-hmm. It's within any arena, really. And so it's just something I've kind of gravitated into. It wasn't something I planned, but that's what I'm doing right now.
Now, I'm sure your books are helping people, assisting people in understanding ADHD, how to work with that, assuming they truly have ADHD. What do you plan on doing with your doctorate?
My doctorate's going to be in educational development with a minor in transformational leadership. I'm already starting right now to venture into public speaking, travel to educational institutions or even churches, into different, like even home group, dealing with homeschoolers and teaching educators and parents about how to deal with the condition. But the book is not just about ADHD. It's about how you approach obstacles. How do you approach life in general? I mean, because this book is just my obstacle in the flesh, so to speak, that I felt like was kind of a testing ground for me to learn overcoming. And so it can be finances, it can be a health issue, it can be a marital issue, relational, whatever, you label that. But it's how you approach it. And anything, teaching people anything, encouraging them with anything being overcomable in this life, if you've got the right tools and the right attitude.
Excellent. I love that. I teach my clients the same thing. And where can people find your book, your information, your website?
My website will actually be up at the end of this month. It's going to be under missyhood.com. You can buy the book through Morgan James Publishing. That's my publisher, through Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, any of the Powell bookstores, BAM, all those independent bookstores. So absolutely. Go check it out.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Melissa, for being a guest on my show this week.
You bet. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to meet you.
And thank you, listeners, for joining me here as well on Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.